Now, one thing I should watch a lot more of is Indycar, and I do remember watching kart on Channel 5 back in the late 90s, and it wasn't until I was about 28 or 29 or so that I realised just how mental that era of racing was. Cars nudging 250 miles an hour on some tracks. To drive that fast on ovals takes a special breed of crazy, much like rallying or the Isle of Man TT, but thinking about it, to do the Isle of Man TT you need to be certified mental. So at the minute, while I don't particularly watch IndyCar, I can drive IndyCars in iRacing, and that's something I'm looking to do more of sim racing wise over the winter and into 2022. You know, hoping to do more oval racing in particular because I'm predominantly a Formula type driver. I was going to do the Indy 500 this year in iRacing, but I just got COVID at the worst possible time and have only just now shifted the extreme fatigue I had from it. And everything still tastes of fish. And while I'll leave iRacing to sort the setups out and just do the fixed stuff, because let's be honest, oval setup is just mind-blowing, there is one thing on IndyCars that make us Euro types just go, what? And that's not a reference to the shirt, by the way. That thing that makes us go, what? Is the weight jacker. IndyCars also have onboard adjustable anti-roll bars, and altering those can help the handling characteristics of the car as the stint progresses. And just as a brief beginner's guide, the anti-roll bar or the sway bar changes how much the car rolls as it goes through or into a corner. And generally, if you're understeering through a slow corner such as La Source at Spa, slack off the anti-roll bar to help allow the car to turn in and lean into the corner. If you can see where I'm coming from, that is. So if you minimise the front and maximise the rear, what will happen is the rear just won't move and you'll probably go for a spin if you try to lob the car into cops at 180. So as the tyres wear off, you can adjust the anti-roll bars a bit to help the car generate some turn-in. And some F1 cars back in the active suspension era had onboard anti-roll bar adjustment, and V8 supercars, IndyCars and some other series still have them on board today. The weight jacker, meanwhile, is only used on the ovals. Probably about 2, maybe 3 months ago now, I talked about how Red Bull's high rake or face down booty up setup was giving them an advantage with the floor change rules for 2021, in Formula 1 that is. Now to describe what rake is, I'll quote Gary Anderson. The rear of the car can roll more as the centre of gravity is altered and the car wants to effectively fall over at the rear, and the rear roll centre will need to be raised to compensate for that. And that's what the weight jacket is. It's a ride height adjustment on the fly for the rear ride height. Well, 50% of the rear ride height anyway. That's because the weight jacker only works on the right rear corner of the car, and drivers can turn that up and down as fuel burns off. And for other reasons which we'll get to in a minute. The weight jacker is a hydraulic device that in effect raises the rear right ride height. Now try saying that 3 times fast. When you turn it up and extend the spring, the diagonal load puts more weight onto the left front tyre. If you turn it down, the car will want to understeer more as the weight comes off the left front tyre. It only moves about half an inch or so, but it's enough. But this combined with anti-roll bar adjustments just makes things a little bit safer, let's say, for the drivers. This being because the ride height is going to change as fuel burns off, and this is something that iRacing is very good at simulating. If you set the car up with an empty fuel tank and then bung about 100 litres of fuel in, it's going to squash down the springs. And using the weight jacker, you can get the ride height on the right rear to be in such a spot where it balances with the left rear due to the asymmetric ride heights and camber settings that IndyCars will use on ovals. As the fuel burns off, that weight is no longer there and the spring will want to extend, so you can use the modification to the ride heights to suit. Although it has to be said that this is all on paper, in theory, and all of that stuff. You know, like I said, setting up an IndyCar for ovals is just black magic wizardry. Tyre wear, fuel burn off, rubber on the track, dirty air, wind, it all adds up. And the last thing you want going into turn 1 at 240 miles an hour is the rear end overtaking you, or not turning in at all. And in an interview with Road and Track magazine, Canadian IndyCar driver James Hinchcliffe said, "There's little bumps on the exit of 2 as well that sometimes throw you off and you need to be cautious of. Then you can go into turn 3 in a full headwind, so you're super high on centre pressure. The front wing's doing a lot of work, the nose is very low on the ground and it's very pointy. You have to be very careful with your hands going in, and again you're adjusting tools based on that. There's some bumps in the middle of 3 that could throw the car off. Into 4, the wind direction is going back the other way. It makes the car understeer quite a bit because it's essentially disrupting the flow of air across the front of the wings, rather than air just coming at it. A bunch of air is thrown at it from the side and you actually lose a bunch of front grip there. If you have a tailwind into 1, that's what you have to do. Now, as the article from which that quote came from said, in fact it was the title of the article, oval racing is more than just 4 boring left turns. There's more going on in an IndyCar cockpit than you might think, and it's usually to stop the car from crashing. But the weight jacker is also open to some exploitation. It's not really exploitation, but you can do some tricks with it. And this is the case with a lot of things in motorsport, like tyre pressures and stuff like that. And while the movement of the weight jacker is only about half an inch or so, 1.2 centimeters, the teams reckon that if you lower the weight jacker to its minimum on the straights, you can gain about half a mile per hour on the straights. So the drivers will come out of turn 2 at Indianapolis and then lower the weight jacker to its minimum setting. Then just before they get to turn 3, they'll spam the buttons on the steering wheel to get it to where they need it to be, while travelling at 240 miles an hour. And without forgetting that they've lowered it. So what I've got here is some footage of an IndyCar going around a track so I can show you what will happen if you crank up the weight jacker or lower it too much. So for this demo I'm using the Dallara IR18 in iRacing at Indianapolis. Yes, I know, it's a sim, it's a video game, why are you showing me this and all that stuff, but it's not like I've got an IndyCar in my backyard that I can just show you. And you can see the 2 WJ buttons there just below the thumb rotaries. That will be what puts the weight jacker up and down. So starting this first flying lap here in Indianapolis, I'm going to go into turn 1. You can see the 0 there at the bottom in the yellow box just to the left of the gear indicator. That means that the weight jacker is at 0, so the ride height is as it was when I left the pit lane. You're subject to fuel, obviously. This is also done on the default iRacing setup that you can just load from the iRacing setup screen. And heading into turn 3 here, the car is nice and planted, very easy to get through 3. Kick the foot right to the floor in 5th gear, and then you take 4, nice and simple as well. As you can see now, I'm putting the weight jacker all the way to the bottom. We'll see how this alters the handling through turn 1. So the ride height is now at the lowest it can get, and turning in, putting in exactly the same amount of steering lock, and the car just wanted to wash towards the wall coming through 1 and had to get out of it ever so slightly. Turn 2 was slightly better because it's taken at slower speed, but I'm just absolutely ruined in terms of straight line speed coming down the back stretch here. Up to 3, I'm about 100th down on the last lap because of that wash through turn 1. Turn 3 sort of adapted. It still felt really tight going into 4, getting really close to the wall on the exit of 3, coming through 4 now. And then we'll see what happens if I put the weight jacker up to the maximum. You can see it going up to 0, and then it'll go all the way up to 20. How will the car handle this time? Well, now the car's turned in too much. I've hit the inside, and that is a rip out of 10.
What happened?
I crashed. I think you saw it. I crashed because the car had more turn-in because of the extra weight on the inside front wheel. As the weight jacker went up, the cross weight went up, and the more weight was put on the left front tyre, and it took weight off the rear right tyre. It means that the car could now pivot more on that front left on turn-in, and the right rear of the car would now want to fall over more as it goes through the corner, swinging the weight of the rear round as the car pivots on the front, which is basically what Red Bull do with their Formula 1 cars with that high rake design. But unlike in Formula 1, the Indy drivers could do this as they're driving the car to keep it as stable as possible through Indianapolis's high-speed bank corners. So hopefully this has given you an idea as to what a weight jacket is and how it is used. If you've learned something here today, then be sure to like the video by clicking the thumb up, and if you want to see more like this and you aren't already, why not subscribe and get the bell on so you never miss out on a future video. Massive thanks as ever go out to the good folk of Patreon for their continued support, and if you want to leave me a monthly tip, then you can do so by following the link in the description, which will also have links to Discord and also directions to all my social media. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind. Have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. So until then, goodbye.